Hi, welcome back to another episode of Real-World Serverless. Today, we're joined by David Boyne, who's the developer advocate at the Winglang and also the creator of EventCatalog. Hey, man, good to have you here.
Hey, Anne, yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me. Yeah, we caught up recently, actually. Yeah, it's great to be here. I've always been a fan of this show. Watch the stuff. So it's awesome actually to be on here and just talking to you. So appreciate
Yeah,
that.
also, excellent. Yeah, it was really nice to see you in the Manchester and for the Manchester ComSum, well, AWS ComSum in Manchester. It was good to hear your thoughts around event-driven architecture as well, because I know that's been your bread and butter for quite some time, when you were at AWS and maybe even before that as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I just naturally kind of fell into the whole thing, to be honest. I was actually before all of that, I was a customer there at AWS, and then building just so happened to be building like SNS, SQS, all this lovely stuff, and then EventBridge come out, and I kind of fell in love with it, and the rest is history. I just ended up working working for AWS and advocating this stuff, but I love event driven architectures. So and I've just been double downing on that since, just naturally. I don't yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'd love to learn a bit more, and also to get you, to talk about event catalog, and I guess maybe your vision for where that's going to go. But I guess to set the background for why why event exists in the first place. Can you talk about some of the common challenges that you've seen people sort of face when it comes to event-driven architectures?
Sure, yeah. How long have we got? No, but it's there's a lot. There's a lot from like I don't know, a business point of view, a technical point of view, and all sorts of things. I remember when I first started, just cracking on, right, and just implementing stuff. So I remember when I first started, EventBridge literally just come out, and how easy is it to raise an event on an event bus, right? Especially these days, and that barrier to entry is reducing more and more. So one problem I often see, and I fell into myself, is like this implementation first mindset. We just jump in and we start raising events in our architecture. We have customers making orders, we have people subscribing, all this stuff. Let's just raise events and handle this over here. And without necessarily thinking about the consequences of any of that, it's just like, yeah, we can have a Lambda function, or we can do something over here. I think uh, there was a lot. There was a lot in this. There's complexity. There's all the way from design all the way down to implementation, and through that you got things like duplicating of events, idempotency, all this kind of stuff. And then as we go at a higher level, it's like, well, what about event design itself? What about schema evolution strategies, and standards and governance? I mean, governance, we'll probably talk about that later, but that's where Event Catalog kind of sits. But it's a huge problem in this area. But yeah, I don't know if there's any of them you want to start at. Otherwise, I can just keep talking
Sure. Maybe
on some of this
let's look
stuff.
at the whole development workflow, starting from the point of, okay, you're thinking about building event-driven architecture, and what are some of the first things you got to think about? And I think, like you said, a lot of people just go straight into it and start sending events, and only to realize later, well, we don't really have ways to kind of reason about the schema, making sure that people don't break other downstream systems with contract changes. How do we version them? How do we capture information about the events so that we have some way to, I guess, to replay them, to catalog them, to visualize them in some way? Things like needing to know the something even simple as what do we use as event ID? Do we have some kind of a unified format, or do everyone just kind of use whatever source event ID you get from, say, from EventBridge? And what happens when we leave the event bridge and go somewhere else? What do we do then? And also, how do we map events contracts from different services and domain-driven designs and all of these other things? Let me start from the very beginning. Where do you think? What are some of the first things you should get right? I think you talk about schema and some of the versioning and
Yeah,
stuff like that.
I think start at the top. I think the easiest thing to do is get started. As I said, especially these days. But I just highly recommend people I speak to is just actually stop and think for a minute. With event-driven architectures, we've got distributed systems, we've got messages that are communicating across different boundaries and systems. And you've got to really kind of think about where are these boundaries. And you mentioned domain-driven design there too. And there's this huge correlation between I think, between domain-driven design and event architectures. Is like, where are the boundaries of our systems? And if we use messages, not necessarily events, but messages to communicate between these systems, what do these messages look like? Who owns the messages, and the downstream consumers and things like that? And there are a lot of things out there to help. A couple of things that I recommend looking at or starting at is like event storming or event modeling. Very popular things, but you can actually talk to business owners, talk to people, which is funny as techies talking to people, but actually talking to stakeholders and actually identifying some events in your architecture, because events themselves, there's like different levels of events. We could have like a low-level private implementation event. Could be maybe we're on the same team and we're in the same boundary. We're creating an order system, so we can create an order placed event or whatever. But there's completely different to like events that we use across boundaries, across these systems that I was just talking about. But as a developer, or the audience listening to this, I assume, there's only so many events you're going to think about, but there's also like business events, like domain events too. And I think it's good to start off just by creating that holistic picture of what is our system actually doing. And we have 10 microservices, 20, and the thing is, with event architectures, at the start, you might think this isn't a problem. We only have me and Jan on the team and we're a startup or whatever. But, you hopefully want to grow this. You want to grow the teams. You want to grow into a big organization, if things are going well. And things get chaotic very, very fast without thinking about, as we mentioned, schemas, about events, about forwards and backwards compatibility, around documentation or validation or testing. So these are things you want to be thinking about, even things like retries. And there is a lot to think about, but equally there's a lot of benefits. Some people might be listening thinking, wow, okay, why the hell would I do this if you're just telling me all the bad stuff? But there are a lot of benefits to this whole approach, this whole evolutionary architecture approach, the whole we can raise events and kind of consume them in the future, which I love. And I've been on teams before and implementing this stuff, and it's just an agility that I've never seen before in like over 20 odd years of doing REST-based stuff, API stuff. And don't get me wrong, our architectures will have this, but requires a different mindset, I think, is the key to all of this. And that mindset has to be... we have to be thoughtful of this, not just dive in, use EventBridge, use SNS, or use RabbitMQ, or use Kafka, or use something, because you will see the value. You'll see that initial value, and you will probably be getting your dopamine hits from this, and things are looking great, and then all of a sudden things aren't great. Right, we have to retry events, we have to replay events. Now, how do we handle that? What side effects is our Lambda function or our code doing now because we've replayed the event? Oh, we didn't think about that. And these are consequences of this type of architecture. But if you go into this architecture type knowing about a handful of these things, I just think it can really help you down the line, and just set yourself up for success. And if you don't set yourself up, I don't know, I feel there's a common theme in this industry that there are common problems that emerge, and I believe people probably would blame the architecture type and the technology when necessarily, I don't know, it's more of a mindset. A lot of it's a mindset change and how you deal with that.
Yeah, and I think this is something that a lot of the team topologies folks often talk about, the fact that the organizations are socio-technical organizations, and you can't just rely on technology to solve all your problems. Your organization, right? The social part is just as important as the technical part, and if the two of them are not aligned, you're just going to create more problems. So at the end of the day, things may not work, and it's not because of the technology itself doesn't work, but it's because of the way that you have organized yourself this is not working with the technology, but rather working against how the technology works. And I've seen this a lot with people that are trying to adopt serverless, where they still have this rigid, gatekeeping in all over the place. And so you have, I think, again, team topologies often talk about the flow, having fast flows, and but if you got gates everywhere, that means that you have all of these feature teams trying to move fast. They can get their code ready, quickly, but pretty soon everyone just gonna hit the same wall. The gatekeeping, the infrastructure teams who's basically holds the keys to the kingdom to your AWS accounts and environment, and everyone just gets stopped right there. So you're not going to see any value as a business if you've got things that are blocking all the flows in the organization. And same thing goes with, like you said, with event-driven architectures. Yes, you can you can have this ability to be really flexible and build systems that can evolve over time easily without hitting with this contract API contract the problems and things like that. Different services can evolve independently, but if you don't think about how that's gonna work with your organization and how it's gonna work with your practices, because the way you write code, the way you write tests, a lot of them have to change and adapt to what it is you're doing, what technology you're working with. And the same goes to serverless as well, that I think a lot of things that I used to do, I do them differently now, because the serverless works differently to running stuff on servers and running monolith applications. So I need to adopt how I do development differently. And a lot of people don't want to do that. They want to do exactly what they have done previously, but just make it fit into the new paradigm that they're working with, and that is just trying to squeeze a square peg into a round hole, and you're just going to run into problems all over the place. And so, how does the event catalog come into the picture? What are some of the specific problems that you're trying to solve with event catalog?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So there's a big problem with event-driven architectures, is the point where at the start, as I mentioned, everything's fine, kind of, and as you scale and you have more teams firing events, the common questions turn up, like things like where are the events, like how do I know what events are out there in the ether in your organization? You're talking, some of these teams are huge, some of these organization enterprise users are just huge. So, and then equally, is like I'm about to make a breaking change, who's going to be affected? Right. So now we're talking about schema evolutions. We're talking about discoverability. We're talking about governance and standards. And it's a weird one, especially with event architectures, because we seem to be lagging behind in this area. So, examples would be if we were tasked to build an API for an organization, I'm pretty sure we would get a good grasp of how we're going to do that, because people have been doing this for like 15, 20, 30 years or whatever. So, open API specs and all this kind of stuff, and there are governance and strategies out there to do this. But I feel like the EDA space is lagging behind, and the more people I speak to and talk to, the more the common problems start to emerge, and a lot of it, to be honest, is in this governance bracket. So Event Catalog solves that. That's the kind of vision of it. Really, is it's technology agnostic. It doesn't matter if you're using Rabbit, if you're using Kafka, if you're using SNS, SQS, EventBridge, whatever. It's discoverability, bringing discoverability to event-driven architectures and allowing your teams to basically say, I have this event, and who's consuming this? Who's producing this? What is the schema of this event? Am I about to break someone or not? Who owns this event? Is what team owns this? And even taking a step up is like, I have a service, and this service raises 10 events and consumes 4 events. Okay, what 10 events does it raise? What version of the events does it raise? Is it still listening to an old version of this event that this other team is listening to? And when you start to map this out, you can actually start to, just skip over this massive governance pitfall that many people are falling into. So I started Event Catalog 2 years ago, just as a side project, just like, I think this idea is cool, and see if anyone else actually, see if it solves any problems out there. And it's fast forward 2 years, and more people are using the open source project. It is an open source project for those listening. And we have Discord members. Feel free to kind of join that. But for the last 2 years, the traction is gaining more and more. And now, in fact, the reason I actually left AWS is actually to focus more time on Event Catalog, because it's at the stage now where it requires more effort, more time, more management issues are coming up and things like that. But there's huge amounts of value still to be had out there in this governance space. And it just doesn't seem to be there. Are things out there like cloud events is one of them, a specification that allows you to document your events in a standard way, which is very, very interesting, because even like how you design your events is a minefield. and it can be a minefield. So cloud event specifications is out. It got graduated this year. And now we can start using a standard specification for our events. It doesn't enforce, how you do certain things, but it tells us here are some particular standards you might want to follow. And the great thing about this is once we have standards, we can start integrating and writing tools around this stuff. So, if we fast forward into the future, if cloud events is adopted, which it already is in a lot of places, when we want to integrate with streams or other business events and things like that, if our broker, our technology knows how to integrate with cloud events, we can start getting that value. And I think this EDA world is just still exploring these standards and these specifications and this. We seem to be, I don't know, it feels like, to me, it seems like we're 10 years plus behind the API space, and there's a lot more to do in this space. There is huge value to be had. Another specification worth shouting out is async API. That's a relatively new specification, but that allows you to document channels and messages and what does my service do and all this kind of stuff. And it just allows, once you have these specs, we can start writing tools, code generation, models across all of this stuff. So yeah, I'm blabbing on here, but how Event Catalog helps is just my vision for the project is just bring discoverability and governance to your chaotic mess. And a lot of people are coming out the woodwork at the moment saying, "Hey, we got this problem. Thank you for Event Catalog," and it's helping them. But I still feel like I'm on step 1 out of 100 on this project. So yeah.
Okay. Is that something that you can actually demo? Do you have anything that you can just showcase the environment, that you've got something that you can kind of show people what you can do? Because obviously you mentioned the different, the specification for how you document your events, the schema of your events, but also you've got other things that can do something similar to a lesser degree. Things like EventBridge has got its own schema registry, but it's just a simple registry. It doesn't do a lot of the things that EventCatalog can do in terms of keeping track of who are the subscribers, and potentially because that relationship, there's a lot more you can do there.
Exactly that, yeah. So I'm just sharing my screen, but I guess people will also be listening, so I'll try and explain what I'm doing. But if you go to eventcatalog.dev, you'll see the website here, and this gives you just an overview of what's happening and what's doing. But Event Catalog basically is generated by Markdown files. Okay, so if you can write Markdown files, which I'm hoping most people can do, then you can use Event Catalog, and it uses something called MDX, which is this just custom component library thing, just Markdown on steroids, basically, that allows us to do custom components and all sorts of things. So if you want to get started, come here, but I'll quickly show you a demo of what do you get, so you can see the demo. So everything you hear is generated by Markdown. It's a static site at the moment. It's a static site website, which has its pros and cons. The pro of this is it can be hosted anywhere. It can be hosted on your machine. It can be hosted on S3. It can be hosted literally anywhere. It comes with a Docker file, and it comes with search and all sorts of weird and wonderful features. But the whole idea is it's a documentation tool for event-driven architectures. So it takes a lot of leaves, a lot of thoughts from domain-driven design and event-driven architectures, and kind of marries these up to hopefully provide some value. Everything here you see in Event Catalog is optional, has the ideas of domains. So again, this is going back to domain-driven design where we have a bounded context. But let's say we're creating a system, we have this orders domain. And we could just start documenting this for people. We can start having who owns this domain, what services belong to this domain. We have visual representations and graphs where we can click on things and drag things around to actually start seeing what's going on. Supports things like mermaid, diagrams and flows, all sorts of things. Flows are basically if you think of like an orchestration end-to-end piece, right? So your product owner or your business might say, okay, what happens when a user unsubscribes from our system? Now, realistically, probably 5 events, 6 events, 2, 3 different services, emails being fired out, all this kind of stuff. And normally this is documented somewhere in some wiki somewhere, if you're lucky, or you just go read the code. But flows is another way in EventCatalog to just document, okay, end to end, what is this particular functionality doing, so I can kind of go in and dive deeper. So that's the idea of there. But everywhere, everything you see on these pages are just markdown. You can add as much or as little as you want. But the whole idea too is you can start linking things. You know, the idea of as a domain has services. So if I go inside a service, this is our inventory service. So this service itself could be a API gateway, Lambda, whatever, you know, DynamoDB. This is the service. But as I said, EventCatalog is technology agnostic, doesn't really care what you're using. But we can see from this page here, you know, we can see that the inventory service, this is what it does. It has a change log. EventCatalog supports change logs. So as you make changes to your schemas, as an example, as you make changes to your service, it can actually write a change log for these resources, these entities. So an example, Jan, you might join the company and you're tasked to do something with the inventory service, and you might want to know some history about the inventory service, why these particular fields are changing in the event. And we can actually do that with EventCatalog. We can actually say, okay, here's version A and here's version B, and this field changed for this particular reason. Now today, none of this context is captured, right? And many companies don't capture this context at all. So when people join and leave and our systems evolve, the questions, the value is, you know, why is it evolved? Why have we gone from this to this? And what do we need to get it to the next version? And as I said, EventCatalog just comes with some basic features and some components that allow you to do things as you see on the screen here, like step components. And I can come in here and copy code, and maybe this is a code snippet to raise an event onto EventBridge using this particular schema, and all sorts of things.
So just want to hold on, yeah. Before we go any further, you mentioned that all of this is markdown. So does that mean that as a user of EventCatalog, I actually have to write markdown to generate these pages, and all the instructions here all have to be manually maintained by someone on the team?
Correct. So there are options. So number one is, so this is all markdown. So you have to someone has to maintain this. Now, there are 2 other options if you want to automate this. So EventCatalog actually also has an SDK. So now you can use these functions to basically say, okay, I want to add an event. I want to, add a service, remove a service. I want to version an event. Now, the interesting thing here is like, okay, so now if we have an SDK into your EventCatalog, we can start to automate some things. Now, what do I want to automate? Okay, let's say you have a Kafka cluster somewhere and you want to read the topics off of it. Okay, so I can read the topics. Now I want to document these topics. I can start using this SDK to basically build up the EventCatalog. And in fact, I can start writing scripts that get generated every time my EventCatalog wants to build, which leads me on to the next thing, which is different integrations. So EventCatalog has this idea of generators, which is like a pre-built script, I guess. But these generators take a particular resource like Async API, Open API, and EventBridge was launched a couple of weeks ago. And it will go to the source, which is your files or your schema registry, pull in the information that it needs, and then document this for you in your EventCatalog. So why is this cool? Because it allows you to keep in sync with the schema registry or your async API files, but equally allows you to add additional context onto that. So let me explain that quickly. So Amazon EventBridge has a schema registry and it has a schema discovery feature. So what you do is you can enable this on EventBridge, and events coming into your bus and out the other side will get automatically documented for us. Okay, they would automatically get a schema in the schema registry. Now, unfortunately, this isn't enough. because, okay, we have a schema, we can do code models and things like that, but the context is lost. What is this schema? What does it belong to? What is the service? What is the all this stuff? It just evaporates. So all you can do with EventCatalog and EventBridge in this example is we can pull in schema from multiple schemas registries. Like we can pull in the information and we can generate our catalog. The interesting thing too is we can add additional context to our events using in the markdown. So let me explain that again. Is we pull in the information. This information is stored in catalog, and then we can hydrate that information with additional markdown context. So what does this mean for your teams? Is, okay, we're using EventBridge, we're in EventBridge house, we've got multiple event buses, whatever's going on. Here is an event catalog that tells you about all the different events. Now, just out the box, you won't get too much. You'll get a schema and that's about it. But if your devs or your teams want to document that particular event, what is this order placed event or subscription cancelled event? What does it mean? How can I raise it? What is the schema? Why is the schema changed? You can start to add this context. And then from a discoverability point of view, you have this thing constantly generating from the registry, and you have the additional context added by your teams. And I won't go too much into it, but there's lots going on here. You can even, I'm just showing on the screen here, you can map particular events into the catalog, particular services by like source, prefix, suffix, detail type. So you can basically say, okay, I have like 1,000 events in my registry, but I only want to map the events with the source of myapp.orders, because that's a convention we're using in our organization. And I'm going to map this to this, order service as an example. So you can start to play around and mix and match, and whatever your conventions are for your events, you can actually start mapping these into your domains and services. And again, this is only one of the examples. There's a lot of users at the moment using things like async API to generate their catalogs too. So in this example, you have 3 services, 3 teams. Each team have documented their service. They've used async API to document the messages of that service. This message could be an event, a query, or a command in this example. And EventCatalog here will just go in and pull all these spec files from all these different teams and give you something at the end of it. It will say, okay, here's your discoverability tool. And your teams can add different context onto the files, the same as EventBridge. And again, this is all automated, reads from the files. You can add manual stuff if you want, or you can use the SDK to, do what you want. Lots going on.
And for the actual flows, I think that's quite interesting, because that's that, as the saying that you've often hear in the event-driven architecture space is that as a publisher, you shouldn't know who the consumers are, and that's the idea of an event versus a command. But as a developer of that system, you kind of do need to know who is listening to your event, or at least if anyone is listening to your event. And so if there are going to be changes you're going to be making, you want to maybe communicate with them ahead of time and whatnot. And the flow is one way to show you who are the subscribers of the event. And I'm guessing this is manually maintained, or is there some way to automatically for a subscriber to let EventCatalog know that, hey, my service is now subscribing to this event, so that it will augment and update the visualization?
Correct. Yeah. So at the moment, the flows itself. So here are the flows. The flows at the moment are manual. So the flows, it's kind of like this YAML kind of format. But there's a feature at the moment open on the SDK to add SDK support for this. Now, why that's cool is then I can use the SDK to create flows, edit flows, change flows. And flows are a different kind of mindset. If I'm a consumer and I'm now consuming a particular event, does that mean I've changed the flow? Flow is the end-to-end business flow. Who don't know? I don't know. In that case, but in the service case, you would see, you would definitely just automatically see that a consumer has come on board, and the consumer is now, as you can see here, the consumer is now consuming this particular event or this message. And I can actually drill down into different events, different services, different domains, and we can kind of click on these and, zoom in, zoom out, and see what's happening. The same with flows. So I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of, because I'm trying to mentally compare this with some more runtime approach. Someone like, say, PostNL has taken with their custom built event broker, which sits between, I guess, the publisher and the subscriber, and so they know, okay, when a subscriber is subscribing to an event, and so they're able to produce this dependency graph, and that graph is actually really useful. I don't know if they're actually doing anything with that right now, and that's one of the things that I find when it comes to implementing business workflows. Even though the individual component themselves may not need to be aware of who's listening, as a business owner who's trying to implement this business workflow, how can I make sure that all the right people are listening to the right events, and that there's no breakage in there in terms of the if you're using EventBridge, the different filter rules that you're using. I can't tell you how many times I've had problems where upstream swears that they're sending the events just fine, but then downstream doesn't get any events, and so the whole business workflow is broken. And it's because so some small change in the contract perhaps, or the filter rules was set up incorrectly so that the events never fires downstream. And so how can I visualize this as at the top level? And that's kind of the things that kind of drives me more towards something like an orchestration approach using step functions for business workflows, because I can't design that, and doesn't leave a lot of room for, I guess, that kind of mistakes or visualization becomes a lot easier when you can see, okay, that's the workflow, that's what's going to happen. As for using events, it's much more of okay, everyone's doing their thing, but if we choreograph everything correctly, we're going to get the right behavior. And so being able to, I guess, bring that visualization and that the ability to understand the workflow and visualize it when it comes to event-driven architectures, I think that's the thing that I'm trying to get in terms of the workflow visualization you've got.
Yeah, I totally agree. I remember kind of step functions, super powerful for just sitting with someone and kind of visualizing what's going on and things like that. The event catalog is an interesting one. So originally started as a static site generator and being able to just bring discoverability in a different way. But I'm speaking to a lot of users at the moment and the community around what would next steps look like. And I think if event catalog knows the schemas and the producers and the consumers, right? I think about the tools you can build on top of that. As an example, could be validation, could be code models or whatever else, or in your case, could be, could I do more runtime stuff with this tool? Could I do more things to help out there, or get or could my service use event catalog to go get the latest schema and we can validate it against this, and all sorts of things. One things like features that come to my mind that I spoke to people about in the past was if I'm consuming an event as a consumer, that's one thing. But you're only interested in particular fields of the event too. There's granular kind of consumption, I guess. And this is kind of going back to Postal's law, where he says, be conservative, be liberal in what you do and conservative in what you expect from others. And I think there's huge value in that. I imagine a tool, I imagine event catalog to be like, okay, I am subscribed to your event, Jan, and I'm only interested in this one or two fields. Like the rest I don't care about. But can I be notified if any of these fields are about to change? Can I be notified if that field disappears? Can I be notified if it went from an int to a string? And that notification, where is that going to go? Is this going to go in Slack? Can I rerun my tests or my systems and things like that? As far as I'm aware, there's nothing out there at the moment that kind of solves that level. But when I bring that up with event catalog users, it's quite an interesting thing. And I think event catalog, if it's used as as that core governance tool, I think there's just huge amounts of runtime and automation and extra value that can be added on top.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole contract testing piece is going to be interesting as well, because this is where I know that we've got the pact, and the pact can technically be used for contract testing for event-driven architectures as well. But it's just as a space, it's just not very well documented or well understood in terms of how to use it for testing event-driven architectures as opposed to APIs. And this is something that I've spoken with Luke from PostNL, as well as Sarah from Lego, a little quite a bit recently, and the different approach to take with the PostNL, the fact that they've got a broker, and the publisher and subscribers have to register their subscription and their schema for publishers into the broker first. So the broker has the time and space to then say, okay, right, you're changing, say, a field from int to string. That's a breaking change, so we're not going to allow that, because, like I said, you want to be strict. You want to be strict about what you expect. So the broker is there to protect the subscribers from breaking contract changes. But at the same time, if there's no one subscribing to this event right now, why should I not be allowed to change schemas, right? You want to enforce that when you know for a fact that there are people listening to that event, and so this can be a breaking change for them. But also there are the behavioral changes. For example, okay, this is a string, fine, but there's no guarantee that at runtime someone's gonna send like an empty string instead of like proper ID or whatever. Mistakes can still happen; they can still be breaking, and so there's still other things that you can you want to be able to catch, and that's where hopefully something like a packed and consumer-driven contracts can kind of fill in that gap. Even though right now it's still rather unclear how exactly that works. I've been trying to figure out how the packs works for EDAs for a while, and just haven't had much success there. And the approach that Lego has done, I think, did you see Sarah's talk at the ComSom?
I did actually today. I watched it this morning.
Right. Okay.
Funny enough.
Yeah. So they had a really interesting approach where they kind of take a lighter weight version of kind of pack that just they publish the schemas to npm, and then the consumers write tests against that. It doesn't have that enforcement element to packed, where you talk about where when upstream changes a schema, some kind of notification can be sent out to downstream, because in that approach, the downstream subscribers are responsible for polling the latest version of the schema package from the publisher, run their test. But in large enterprise, there's going to be lots of systems through team reorganization, attrition, and what have you. The system just not being actively worked on, and so how do you ensure that when you make a change, those systems are running in production? No one's actually working on them right now, but you still don't want to break them, right? So how do you ensure? How do you provide the governance, the enforcement element to contract? And I feel this is where EventCatalog, being there in the middle and more of a sort of design time sort of tooling can provide a lot of value in that particular space around testing as part of the maybe overall governance.
Totally, yeah. It's as you kind of alluded, it's a minefield, I think, out there with this stuff. And there are strategies. There are other strategies you can hopefully enforce, but it's more of a governance thing. It's things like, okay, what's our schema evolutionary strategy? Are we backwards compatible, forwards compatible? And if you're thinking about that itself, you're in a good space. But most people don't. Most people just kind of YOLO this stuff, and that's where the headaches emerge. But I think you're totally right. I think this is the vision. One of the visions for EventCatalog really is exactly that. I think it has the potential to solve some of them problems, because if it knows who the consumers are, it's technology agnostic, it's schema agnostic. Actually, it supports Avro, JSON, whatever you want to use. So if it had this kind of plug-in way or automated way where we could define some of these rules as a user, and you could get notified of changes incoming, you could have a catalog in test or in staging or production, then it becomes an added value, I think, for sure. Because as you say, today with Pact, and I saw Sarah's schema stuff, which is cool, it still feels very we can improve this area a lot, I think. And hopefully
Yeah,
EventCatalog
absolutely.
can do that.
Yeah, and so I'm really glad that you're working on it full time, because so I think this is definitely a space that's screaming out for a solution, and ideally one that you can just pay and use, as opposed to having to host anything myself.
This is it's still early. As I said, it's still early days for EventCatalog. The project itself is open source, it's free. Still trying to make things sustainable, so exploring ways, but like even hosted catalogs, plugin, dual license. I'm not sure what it looks like yet, but there are problems out there that need solving. So hopefully, hopefully we can fix them and figure out the rest when it comes at some point.
Yeah. I mean, I really like a lot of things that the DDD space has been doing. I think one thing we haven't even talked about is anti-corruption layers and all these other sort of patterns that the DDD gives you. This patterns and observation, I guess they call it, that the DDD space gives you, and I'm really keen on seeing more people kind of adopt these kind of practices. And like I said, the first step would be to just be aware of them and think about it, and rather than just going in just blind and just gangbusters and this is working great, and then suddenly, holy crap, this is terrible.
What's happening? What's happening? And then and then to be honest, we've all seen it before. Just you end up in big rewrites and people leave, and I don't know. But you're totally right. It's just being conscious of. You mentioned it before with the serverless mindset, right? And I think there's essentially an EDA mindset, which is it's not your typical way of doing things. Any distributed system isn't really, and it's just understanding some of these pitfalls and like, okay, I'm, as you mentioned, the bounded context mappings with domain-driven design, like understand what they are, like don't necessarily go use them all, but there'll be points where you consume an event, and do I want this event's model to be in my domain or not, and do I need to change this to something that we understand as a team? Okay, we're talking about ubiquitous language here, some standard stuff. But the easiest thing to do is just consume and go. And it's like, wow, I've got this order model everywhere inside my notifications email system now, and what's happening? And it's just, separation of concerns. And it's an interesting one because, when we're in one code base, one monolith, people have been doing solid and dry stuff for years and years, and you see all these nice models and patterns and things. But as soon as we kind of break that up into this distributed world, I think the same principles apply, but we just got to be aware of, these boundaries. And by default, unfortunately, none of that's there, and it's up to you to sort that out. And if you don't, you'll probably be, I don't know, I guarantee you'll be in a mess in a couple of years at least.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen so many people run into problems of that description, and even something like something as simple as we talk about domain quite a few times, domain event. What does domain event even mean to a lot of people don't understand that, and even the bounded context, another good one. The actual definition of bounded context is that within which you've got one set of ubiquitous language, one unified understanding, but that's not how most people use it, and I'm guilty of that as well. A lot of time I just kind of lazy and use bounded context to mean a system. Kind of just falsely assume that one system is one domain, one set of team ownership, one set of language. But oftentimes, the bounded context is a lot bigger than just one system. It's maybe it's entire business area with many systems and whatnot. And so even the way we can talk about it sometimes it can be tricky, it can be difficult, and there's a lot of confusion in that particular space. Another space, I guess that's still also, even though it's been quite mature, but still a little bit, feels a little bit wild west, is infrastructure as code. And so, you've been working with Winglang for a little while now. Can you maybe give us a high level pitch? Why do we need something like Winglang? Why is it, why is CDK or CloudFormation or Terraform not sufficient?
Yeah, for sure. I joined Winglang a few months ago, back in June now, and I kind of been looking at what they were doing when I was at AWS, and I reached out to Alad and Shai, who's the founders there, and it's like, do you need any help? And I kind of joined them on that on some of this journey. But Winglang's very interesting, like stuff I've never seen done before, right? Kind of merging the it's a brand new programming language that kind of merges, your application, your infrastructure as code. Like, for example, why can't I declare a bucket and I had permissions to the bucket or whatever, like Wing will handle all this for you. But we have this concept of like pre-flight, in-flight, and I think this is where the magic is myself. But on the pre-flight, this is provisioning code, right? So I have a bucket, I can do particular things on the bucket in this particular part, right? This is things like, I'm trying to think of some. Maybe grant some permissions or add some properties to the bucket or whatever that is, right? But inside of in-flight, this is runtime code now. We can actually start interacting with the buckets, like add a particular object to the bucket and things like this. But the mindset is very interesting. The mindset is once you get that understanding, it's like, okay, all I have to do is focus on just focus on a particular piece of logic or application code, and I don't have to. And what Wing will do as an example, it will understand in your in-flight, in your runtime, that this function needs certain permissions, and it will handle that for you, right? So I don't no longer have to worry about this kind of stuff either. So it's very, very interesting. I recommend people, if you're interested, come on. I've got those examples on the website, come to the Discord. But if you're curious about, I feel we need the next step of, CDK and things like this, and to how do you simplify the cloud? And I think this is a step forward to that for sure. And people that work there, the people I've worked with there, are just super smart people, friendly people. So yeah, if you're interested, come along or ask me any questions. I'll happily help. But there's somewhat of a learning curve there. It's a new programming language, like Rust, or if you're going to Go or something else like that. It's a brand new thing. So and with the programming language, the thing that fascinates me the most is you can actually your I guess your playground is it's up to you to define the playground, because it's a new programming language itself. So that kind of took me a while to get my head around, but we can start doing things like local simulation. So Wing actually supports local simulation. So if I'm building an application like APIs or buckets or functions or containers or whatever it is, I can actually run a command called Wing it, and I can actually run this on my machine, because we have the concept of different platforms and all sorts of things. I don't know. It's a whole talk in itself. But if you're interested in a programming language for the cloud that's not tied to AWS, there's Azure and GCP, even custom platforms, which is very interesting. So if you're building, like if you have, let's say you're an enterprise and we do functions in a particular way, we do this in a particular way, you can actually create your own platforms and then give your engineers the code to deploy against these platforms. So yeah, it's great. It's wild. It's cool.
Right. Yeah. So I guess it reminds me of something that Gregor Hopp was talking about before he left AWS. He had this grand vision of architecture as code. So, not just because the way most people use the CDK is that they just use level 1, level 2 constructs at best, whereas the real power is with level 3 constructs. And in the right hand, you can probably achieve that grand vision of, just custom, maybe almost business specific language for describing your architecture with code. But so that's Greg talking about how he sees people should be using CDK, and what I actually see people use CDK, which is a very different thing. So I guess for me, this is kind of where Winglang has got that advantage, because it is a purposely designed programming language. I mean, CDK probably had that opportunity with the constructs, but because it has to work with everybody, I guess so. You have to support those low level level 1, level 2, and whatnot, and that loses a lot of the expressive power that you're supposed to get with a general purpose language like what CDK is trying to do. And so I'm quite hopeful for what the Winglang is doing, and I'm gonna be keeping an eye on what you guys are doing, and I hope to get Yilad on here sometime at some point as well to maybe like I said, do a whole talk around Winglang and how that's gonna revolutionize IEC and yeah, but yeah, David, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today, and it's really good to get your insights on event-driven architectures. And I hope you continue to improve EventCatalog, and look forward to seeing what you do next.
Yeah, thanks, Jan. Yeah, thanks a lot for coming on and inviting me. It's been awesome and great.
Yeah, I guess I won't see you at the re:Invent this year because you're going to be busy working on EventCatalog. But I hope to catch you some other time. Take it easy,
for sure.
Mate.
Always. Yeah. Cheers, mate.
Cheers, guys.
See you later.
Right, see ya.